Right.
Let's talk about your story, man. How did you get involved in all this? Where do you come from?
Well, yep. I'll take you back to the beginning because I respect you a lot, and I told you that. I think what you've done, man, is really, and all the people who have done what you've done, creating these conversations, is an unquantifiable contribution to society. My story all started, I'd say, I came onto the public scene as a basketball player at Iowa State University. I was an All-American high school athlete. I came up through the Nike prep circuit as well. I went to the University of Minnesota, which is in my hometown, but I transferred to Iowa State. I had to sit a year. Back then, you got penalized a year for transferring. Now they have a sort of no penalty rule, but back then you got penalized a year. So I had to sit a year. I didn't play until my junior year. I had a good season, and during this season, I talked publicly about my struggles with anxiety. And this was unique because a lot of people in the public square, especially collegiate athletes, but really any public figures, weren't talking about mental health as much. It certainly wasn't the mainstream sort of buzz topic that it's become now. And you could argue that I was sort of the first stone in that avalanche. And I'm actually kind of disturbed and disappointed at how it turned out. And we'll talk about that trajectory here a little bit. But anyway, I started to talk about mental health, and I was playing well. And so it got a lot of traction because the college sports writers were going, we never had a guy talk about anxiety, but we knew people had these issues. But also this guy is leading his team in every major statistical category: points, rebounds, blocks, steals, assists. And I was the only player in the country to do that. And not many players in the country do that in any season. It's kind of a statistical anomaly. So there's this whole paradigm's created now about, okay, so what do we mean when we say mental health then, or mental health issues or struggles or mental illness or anxiety? And so as the season went on, I continued to prove that I could compete at the highest level against guys who were projected to be first round picks. This went into the NCAA tournament that's going on now. My team, Iowa State's playing tonight, actually, in the Sweet 16. But in our tournament, we played the defending champs, UConn, coached by Jim Calhoun at the time. And I had an incredible game against them. They had 2 high-level first-round picks projected in that game. And then we played Kentucky, who had Anthony Davis on the team at the time, and 6 other first-round draft picks projected. And I was the dominant player in that game. So then, the talk was, okay, this guy's probably one of the most NBA-ready players in his class. I declared for the draft, and something very, very strange, you could say, happened. It exploded the mental health conversation because now the question was, how does the NBA view mental illness? Do they view it as a character flaw, or do they view it as this integral piece of this comprehensive health model, right? This progressive view of health and mental health as a spectrum where everybody has a mental health, right? So that question was posed by the mainstream establishment, and the answer was they did view it as a character flaw. And I pushed back on that narrative immediately. Like as soon as the stories start to drop, Sports Illustrated, USA Today, Royce is declaring for the draft, but he's a mystery pick because of this whole anxiety snafu. I'm going, no, this ain't a character flaw. And the fact that it's even a question proves that you guys don't understand the real dynamic of what's happening with this mental health crisis. Long story short, I get drafted to the Houston Rockets 16th, but I was projected to have a top 5 talent, NBA-ready skill set. And upon my arrival in the NBA, I discovered by reading through my collective bargaining agreement, our CBA, that there wasn't a single mention of mental health in the entire document. And I went to my team and I said, listen, I want to be as good of a player and as productive as I possibly can be for you guys. But I understand that obviously by the language in this document that the understanding around mental health and the issue like the one I deal with, anxiety disorders, is lacking. And I'm willing to have an open conversation with you guys transparently about what I deal with so that we can have a better relationship and trying to make me the most productive player I could be. Okay. They said, okay, that's good. Okay, well, let's put it in writing, I said. Let's figure this out. Well, how does this look in writing? Oh, we can't put any of this in writing. I go, why not? The color of the socks a guy has to wear in the game is in writing.
Is it really?
Oh, it absolutely is. And the penalties. And the real reason that I said we needed to put it in writing because the CBA already had a banned substance list that had anti-anxiety medication on it.
Whoa.
Okay, so now I'm going, everybody's telling this narrative that the pro sports world is uninitiated with mental health as a topic, but here's this banned substance list with tons of mental health related content in it. So somebody knew something about mental health or knows something. And so I said, okay, so let's say, for example, they basically said, well, look, you can take the Xanax, because Xanax was on the banned substance. You can take it. Don't worry. You got a doctor's prescription. And I go, well, wait a minute. Why is it on the list? Is it because if you take Xanax for 2 weeks, even as prescribed, you can get addicted? And that is the truth about Xanax. It's the most addictive drug there is in the world. And so they were right to have it on the banned substance list. But my point was to say, hey, the reason I mostly take Xanax is because I have a fear of flying, or that fear flying exacerbates my anxiety. So how about we cut some of the Xanax out per year by allowing me to drive from Minnesota to, say, Chicago, 6-hour drive, a little bit longer hike than a private charter jet, catered and all of that. But I was willing to take the hit because I understood the dangers of taking Xanax for 9 months continuously. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that. And so that's where the fight began ultimately between me and the league. And I became this spokesperson on mental health. And what I was really trying to say is, like, it wasn't about me getting special or preferential treatment. It was to say that the NBA represents a global corporate community, which they do. Yeah. In fact, it's the watering hole for every industry in our society. And that there was something wrong with the global corporate community and how they viewed humanity. And that mental health wasn't about the DSM or diagnosis. It was to say that mental health is another way to say the human condition, where mind, body, and spirit converge. And they wanted nothing to do with that. And they blackballed me for that. And they told me, you're too smart for your own good. We agree with you about mental health. We agree it's an epidemic. We agree it's the crisis over the hill. But who are you to tell us to change anything? You don't have any leverage. So you can either play, or you'll never become the spokesperson that you could and we could make you be on this issue. And I've been fighting that battle for the last 10 years.
Did you leave the league right away?
I gave them the ultimatum that we needed to put a mental health policy in place, or that I wouldn't play.
And then what happened?
I was traded from Houston what happened was the Houston Rockets owner at the time, Leslie Alexander, who now sold the team to Fertitta, who owns it now. But at the time it was Leslie Alexander, and his attorney said to me, hey, my daughter has anxiety. His name was Mr. Goldberg. He comes into the meeting. First of all, they forced me to go to psychiatrist every day. And the psychiatrist told him, don't do that. This isn't about him needing psychiatric help. He's telling you guys that we need something in writing that acknowledges mental health as a core component of overall health. And I agree with him. So then they got pissed off at the psychiatrist. and so they made me do that every day, or else I would be fined, they said. So I went. I said, okay, I'll go. Me and this guy could chat it up. Actually, we'll start designing the policy, which we did. Basically, they walked in there and after 2 months of back and forth, and them telling me that, for me to bust to a game could be a salary cap infringement, and, all of these other weird kind of, business tactics, intimidation tactics. They finally just came in and said they sent an emissary, right? And it was this attorney, and he goes, listen, my daughter has anxiety. She doesn't like to fly either, but I'd make her, and she'll thank me for it later. She hates me now. I agree with you. This is a big issue. And if you agree to go to our D League, which is now called the G League, minor league affiliate, in the offseason, I'll help you put this mental health policy in place, and I'll make sure that the owners accept it. When the offseason came, there was no talk of that policy, and I was traded to Philadelphia. And Philadelphia released me before the season started, even though the local media there in Philly thought that I was a shoo-in to make that team. But Sam Hinkie, who had been the assistant GM under Daryl Morey, who was an interesting character in this whole story arc, he was the understudy of Daryl Morey. So they basically did a trade and dump. And I was, 21 years old. I was naive. I had the inclination or the instinct to block the trade, but I was encouraged by the union that it would be maybe advantageous for me because Philadelphia is in this East Coast corridor, and there's a lot of games that I would be able to drive to throughout the season. So, ultimately after the Philadelphia thing, I just didn't get another shot. I wrote letters. I had medical professionals, mental health professionals write letters and say, this mental health issue is real, that the NBA is in a perfect position to back up its promotion of caring about the greater good by just putting in a very simple, doable mental health policy. And they just ignored me.
Why do you think they did that?
At the time, I thought it was because there was something they didn't know. I was arrogant. I was mistaken. I was naive. I thought that I was going to be able to bridge the gap through genuine participation of some type of attitude or perspective that they had gotten wrong. But that wasn't the case. The entire corporatocracy knew that psychological, that the predatory predation, let's say, on the human psychology was the next iteration of the war that they wanted to wage on the common people. I didn't get that at the time, that social media was around the corner and the dopamine, the dopamine war was coming around they knew it. So when I went to talk about mental health and say, hey, hold on, there's a cultural mental health renaissance and revolution that needs to happen here right now. I'm sitting there thinking that they had archaic views about mental health, but I was mistaken. They were advanced around the human psychology, and they planned to be predatory with it.
So they were planning on like they knew that it was going to be weaponized, like mental illness would be weaponized, so they didn't want to get involved in it or something?
Let me interject real quick. There are companies, when it comes to mobile apps, there was a viral, I covered this several years ago. A company says, we can program your audience for you. So when you've got big companies that are planning on making mobile apps, they're going to consultants saying, how can we make it so that people become addicted to this? And then the company will analyze their data and be like, do these things and people will become addicts.
Yep.
It's digital addictions.
So, and you can place that or stand that next to a 21-year-old kid coming in saying, hey, why is the alcohol cutoff not at halftime? Why is it okay? Why is it morally and ethically okay for us to use taxpayer money to build these arenas and then build parking structures where we basically incentivize people to drink and drive with their kid or come to the game and get drunk in front of their kid or even worse, somebody else's kid and yell this belligerent shit at the game? Like, they were like, and I'm sitting here saying all of this based on logic and reason. And they're like, we're about to go to town on the working class through psychological manipulation.
I think it's simpler put, to be honest, because I think, the way you describe it is what's happening, but their attitude is probably like, how much did we just pay this guy to make our mobile app that makes these young kids addicted to it?
50 million.
50 million. We can't have this guy screwing that up.
Yeah.
Right. So they thought you were a threat to the system, that you were going to gain too much power and influence in the system? Twofold.
Yeah. Yes. But there's a canary in the coal mine in this situation. Yes, in the immediate, they're like, this kid is trying to change the status quo, and that's a danger. But the mental health topic, as a topic in general, is the one topic that puts a mirror up to the individual. So in spirit, they didn't want to have the mental health conversation because they didn't want to have to look at themselves.
Your story to me sounds like, you thought that once you got in, people would be willing to engage with you and you'd have a positive impact. But the reality is, for political office even, you end up getting into a position where there's a train coming at you and you're trying to push against it. That train's going to keep coming. So you go in good faith, think you're going to have this impact, and then we hear it across the board from the presidency to members of Congress. It's like as soon as you get in, the machine controls you. Yeah. And then if you resist it enough, eventually the machine just shoves you out of the way.
And, as a young kid growing up, I grew up in the Michael Jordan era. Right. In the Twin Cities, in Chicago, WGN. We got all the local Bulls games in the 90s.
Huh?
We had WGN in the Twin Cities. So we got to see all the home Bulls games. So I was a basketball lover, right? And when you grow up in a single mother household and she pays the rent with her tips and you go to the gym and you create a relationship with the local recreation center manager, and he allows you to spend that extra time in the gym all by yourself, just shooting, playing games with yourself to 100. I'm the Bulls one night, I'm the other team the other night. You grow up with a very naive view of what the basketball industry or basketball itself is all about. And I really thought that the NBA was this institution that was based on all of the things that basketball had been for me growing up. A safe haven, a place of teamwork and hard work, genuineness, meritocracy. And you get there and it's just like, nah, kid, that we're a cog in the machine and don't rail against us because we'll squash you.
How do you get, so what's the next step in this process for you? How do you get from there to now you're running as a Republican against Ilhan Omar? It seems like there's something big happened in between there.
Well, a lot of things happened, but mainly that the same liberal establishment that I've watched take hold of the cultural narrative over the last 10 years was the same one that tried to defame me and poke fun at me 10 years ago.
It's the same one that is making a lot of money in China.
Absolutely. And so, you know, I was in Canada for 2 years. I saw them go after Jordan Peterson. I was living there, playing for London Lightning in London, Ontario, in the National Basketball League Canada. And I watched that. It was the most peculiar thing because I was a nomad up until that point. I was a cultural Democrat, as many young black men are growing up in these inner cities. They're cultural Democrats, although they tend to be conservative, really culturally, but in party affiliation, they tend to be Democrat. And it was just the oddest thing to me. I had never seen, just me personally, I had never seen people go after somebody who was so reasonable and logical and just seemed to be kind of a nice guy with such obscene and ridiculous points. And I'm sitting here as a person who fought the NBA going, I have genuine points about the establishment that we should be talking about. Why are you guys going after him about pronouns? I don't get it. And so I watched that, and then I came back from Canada, played in the Big Three. And while I was playing in the Big Three, I started to talk about, broader issues politically, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, the concentration camps in China, Epstein, all of this was back in 2019. And then I wrote a book, an open letter to LeBron James entitled Epistle to the King. And I basically lay this out from post-World War II all the way up until the 2016 election of Donald Trump, of how the black community has been basically used as this linchpin, this cultural linchpin of this Marxist, this sort of Marxist globalist revolution. And then George Floyd happened.
And you were right there.
Well, the pandemic happened first.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to Steve Bannon's show. I was introduced to his PBS Frontline interview. I had already knew about him since Trump ran, but I didn't really do a deep dive. I still had a surface view of him. Then I saw the PBS Frontline interview, and then the pandemic broke out. Then I got introduced to War Room, as soon as the pandemic broke out, and I was listening to it every day. It was the most accurate coverage of the pandemic at the day. It was pretty much some of the only coverage. And then George Floyd happened 2 months later in May. That was March, and then May, George Floyd happened.
What did that change for you?
Go ahead.
I just got to bring up one quick point as we get into George Floyd. Mm-hmm. You know that story about the mural of George Floyd with the crown that got struck by lightning and exploded?
I don't know that story.
There's a wall.
I know the
with
wall.
A mural.
Yeah.
And so in the middle was George Floyd, and there was a crown over his head. On a partly cloudy day, meteorologists reported a lightning strike. Witnesses said they saw the lightning strike, and it blew out only George Floyd from the building. The whole building was no roof damage. That's just a freaky story that I want to bring up whenever it comes to the George Floyd stuff, because that's crazy.
God's wrath is fast.
Or metallic
that's
paint,
or
both. Both could be both.
like someone staged it or something.
I don't know.
That's crazy.
Is that true?
This
someone staged.
Oh no, I have no explanation.
Okay, yeah.
Like God's wrath. Yeah. I don't know, man.
Well, yeah.
Well, that's what a lot of people felt. Yeah. Or that lady who was mocking the pandemic, and then do you see this one, the comedian? Mm-hmm. And then she just faints, just falls back and hits her head.
Yeah, she was making fun of.
I just wanted to bring up the George Floyd thing because there's that weird moment that happened. But
she said Jesus loves me the most, and
right.
That's when she fell down.
That's right.
It was like, I was like, nah.
And then she hit her
Jesus
head.
loves everyone the same.
You can't. You can't. Well, what we talk about Christianity, taking God's name in vain is a grave sin, and the wrath is quick.
You really can't. Mess with it. It's not worth messing around.
I don't want to derail. I just wanted to mention that story because it's crazy. But so now George
Floyd. So look, the George Floyd thing happened. So I write this letter to LeBron James where I basically lay out how black people, specifically pop black figures, have been used as a 3-card Monte to not only keep the black community in this in this place of submission as a community, but they've been used to now go and attack the rights of others on the grounds of this cultural. This culture war and an information war. So I lay this out in the book. The book's 255 pages. It ends up being. It's like 40,000 words or something. And then George Floyd happens. And my whole point to LeBron James was to say that in the position you've been given, God-given, that you have an obligation to lead in a way that's more genuine, authentic, and honest. That was the whole crooks of the book, but I had to go through the history, right? Because I can't just assume that he's initiated into this post World War II liberal world order type. I just didn't assume that. So I kind of took him through it in good faith. And then George Floyd happens, and I'm like, oh, I just wrote about what I need to go do, right? And so I knew from watching the narrative be crafted and manipulated by the mainstream media that they were going to try and hijack that moment in a variety of ways. And I knew that I was perfectly positioned to go into my community and lead in a way that changed the narrative. And that's what I did. We led several. First of all, chaos broke out. There was fires. There was unrest, real unrest that was on the verge of being anarchy. It was anarchy, but it was on the verge of getting really out there. And in the middle of that, I called my basketball friends up, other guys who have big names in Minnesota sports community at least. And I said, we got to go do something. I'm leading this protest. If you don't come, don't shake my hand. We're not friends no more. You guys got to put more in. And we led peaceful protests. But I wasn't going to allow the mainstream media or their BLM subsidiary dictate the tone of the protest. So instead of going to the first precinct, we went to the Federal Reserve, right? And a lot of these young white liberal women who want to participate and are really passionate and active. I'm sitting on top of the stoop outside of the Federal Reserve, and we're doing a die-in at the Federal Reserve, and they're looking at me like I got three eyes, like, why are we here? And that's when it hit me. It hit me that this entire culture war, information war, is not just a byproduct of individual people having low morals and ethics. That is a part of it, but the establishment has gotten really good at fooling people, and I was able to go out and fight that just by being one man with a profile in my community that had gained the respect of a few people in my immediate circle. And who would stand around me at a moment of chaos and turmoil and lead, physically take dominion in the community and say, hey, if you have a grievance, that's great. That's good. You should participate as a citizen peacefully. And if you want to negotiate the social contract between you and the state, you first have to identify the institutions that really preside over you. So we're on our way to the Fed. And if you don't know what the Fed is, when we get here and do this die-in, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. The mainstream media didn't even want to cover that. They wanted it to seem like I was a emerging civil rights activist for Black Lives Matter, and they didn't want to give me any airtime once again to explain my position because it's antithetical to what they were trying to accomplish. And so that's how eventually in 2020, when we played with the Big Three again, Jeff Kwatnitz, who was a co-owner with Ice Cube, used to be partners with Steve Bannon. And I told Jeff, if you don't introduce me to Steve, me and you aren't friends anymore. and Jeff goes, I got you. He sends me the number right away, and I get hooked up with Steve. We start to have great conversations, build a relationship. He's a mentor, friend of mine, and the rest is history.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.